Hi everyone, welcome to the last lesson in chapter 10. So we're going to still talk about the equations of circles on the coordinate plane. This time we're not graphing. We're going to go back and forth between the two different forms that you can see. So we're going to learn how to convert those different types of equations. So all the steps are on the front of your foldable. Okay, so when you get stuck or you need to see them, they're all written out there for you. We're going to go between the standard, the center radius form, and then the general form. Okay, so in the top, we have the general form, but we want to convert it to the standard form. So we want to make it look like what we learned last class, the x minus h squared, y minus k squared equals r squared. Okay, but they mixed up all the variables and they're not in parentheses or anything. So that's what we have to do, is get those parentheses. And we're going to do that using some skills you learned in Algebra 1 last year to factor. Okay, so our first step says to group all the terms with the same variables together. And when we do that step, we also want to move any numbers that don't have variables over to the other side. So since in our formula x comes first, we're going to put our x's first. So we have an x squared, and then the other x term is minus 6x. I'm going to leave a little bit of space. And then we have a y squared, and our other y term is 4y. Leave a little bit of space. So we grouped all our x, we grouped all of our y. So the last term is the plus 4, and like I said, we want to move it over to the other side. So it would be equal negative 4 when it gets moved over. So that's step 1. So step 2 says find b over 2 squared for x and y. So remember in quadratic equations, the x term is your b, like ax squared plus bx plus c. So b for the x's is negative 6. So we want to find the b for x, well, the b over 2 squared for x. So that would be negative 6 over 2 squared. So divide, we get negative 3. Excuse me. And then we square it, we get 9. So our b over 2 squared for x is 9. Now we're going to do the same thing for the y's. So we need to find the b over 2 squared for y. So the b for y is 4. So 4 over 2 squared. So 2 squared equals 4. Okay, so that's just a formula you have to memorize. So step 3 says to complete the square by adding that number that we found to both sides. So we have to do it for the x's and the y since we have both variables. So our x number is 9. So we're going to add this to our x part of our equation, but we have to add it to both sides to keep it balanced. Okay, and then our y number is 4. So for our y's, we'll add 4, and again, add it to both sides to keep it balanced. So I hope you're with me so far. So the next step is probably the most complicated step because you have to remember how to factor. So we're going to look at it as just the x part first. Okay, so I'm just going to write it a little bit bigger over here. So remember when you factor, we're looking for what times to be this number and adds to be the middle number. So what two numbers times to be 9 and add to be 6? Well, the only factors of 9 are 9 and 1 and 3 and 3. And these are the only ones that would add to be 6. But we want it to add to be negative 6, so it has to be negative. So we'd have x minus 6, or x minus 3, and x minus 3. So when we times them together, we get positive 9. And when we add them together, we get negative 6. So as you notice, in this problem, it ended up both being the same. And that's because of the number we added to make it perfect like this, because it's a perfect square trinomial. So since we have two of them, we can just write it like a perfect square, like that. Okay, so that would be how we would factor these. The shortcut to it is that it always gets the sign of the b, and then it's always the square root of the c. So we're going to go back. So when we factored this, we had x minus 3 squared. Now we're going to do the same thing for the y's. So I'm not going to write it out as 2. I'm just going to put it as one thing. So I said it takes the sign of the middle one, and the square root of the last one. Remember, the other way to think about it is what times to be 4, but adds together to be 4. So it would have to be 2 and 2. So since it's 2 parentheses, it'd be squared. Okay, just like the one we just did. So you could have written it before that as y plus 2, since it'd be 2 and 2. And then since there's 2 of them, we can combine them. And then the last step is just to add those together. So we get 9. So we converted it to the circle radius form. So we turned it from that to this. Now you can see your center and your radius. Okay, so let's try the next one. I know these can be kind of complicated. So remember, our first step is to rearrange all of our terms. Okay, we want to put the x's together in the front, the y's next, and move the constants to the other side. Okay, so we have x squared, we took care of that one, plus 20x, did that one, leave some space, y squared minus 8y, and then we're going to subtract this over to the other side. Okay, so our next step is to find the b over 2 squared. So our x1 would be 20 over 2 squared. So 10 squared is 100. So for our x number, we'd be adding 100 to both sides. So for y, we would have negative 8 over 2 squared. So negative 4 squared is equal to 16. So for y, we'd add 16 to both sides. So after we find our b over 2 and add it to both sides, the last step is just to do the factoring. So we know it's going to be x something squared plus y something squared equals the sum of all that, which is 81. So we now just need to figure out what goes in there. So remember, I said it gets the sign of the middle term, and then you square root this. So it would be positive, the square root of 100 is 10. The other way to think about it is that what times to be 100 that adds to be 20. So 10 and 10. So that's where we get that. So for this one, our sign is negative, and the square root of 16 is 4. And that is it. So this is really just an algebra lesson, a review from last year. I don't think you guys probably learned this last year, but it's supposed to be an algebra. Okay, so I hope we're good with those ones. What we're going to do now is work on the bottom. And the bottom, we're starting with this form, and we're switching it to this form. So to do that, we just have to FOIL and then put everything in the right order. So, let me split this in half. It was right too big and cross over to the other side. Okay, so we're going to FOIL both of them. It might help you if you write it twice. So this is really x minus 3 times x minus 3 plus y plus 2 times y plus 2 equals 4, since there's 2 of them, you know, and that might help you FOIL. So first, outside, inside, last. So x times x is x squared. X times negative 3 is negative 3x. Already trying to add things in my head. We got another negative 3x, and when we times those two together, we get positive 9. Now do the same thing for y's. So y times y is y squared. Y times 2, 2y. Here's another 2y. And then we times those together, and we get 4. So I don't know if you see the pattern, but that always happens. So there's some shortcuts. If you want to know them, I can explain it to you in class. Okay, so from here we just need to rearrange it to make it look like this. So the x squared, y squared, the x piece, the y piece, and then the constant. So the squared terms come first, then the regular terms, and then ones with no squared. X is in front. So our x squared term comes first, so x squared. Then the y squared piece will come next. I like to cross them out as I go so I make sure I don't forget anything. So then our regular x terms, which we have two that we need to combine, so -3 and -3 make -6x, so we took care of both of them. 2y and 2y make 4y, so we took care of those. So now we need to get all of our numbers together. So on this side we have a 9 and a 4, which make 13, but we have that 4 on the other side, and we can't have that, so we have to make it equal 0. So you got to move it to the right side, or left side. So then our final answer is going to be x squared plus y squared minus 6x plus 4y plus 9 equals 0. And that's it. So when you're doing this, you just have to FOIL, and then combine like terms. Okay, so go ahead and pause your video and try the example number 2 there. So remember, write them out as 2 parentheses and then FOIL it. Pause your video. Okay, so here we go. Wrote it out in 2 parentheses, FOILed my x's, FOILed my y's. I didn't want to write an extra step, so I subtracted my 49 before I combined terms. So x squared's first, x, y, and then the constant. So it became -32 because we had 16 plus 1 minus 49. And that is it. So make sure you write down any questions you have, and we can talk about them in class tomorrow. Werner out.